The first sound is a twig snapping like a bone through skin, then another, then the scrape of claws somewhere behind me, not yet running, stalking, tasting my fear in the wind. Pines bank the moon, mist hangs low like an unspoken warning. I can smell iron on my tongue, even though I haven't bled yet. I turn. I shouldn't. I do. Eyes not far, the wrong kind of bright, the kind that remembers my name. It hits me before I can shout. A weight like falling timber, a heat like a furnace pressed to the lungs. Teeth. A pressure that means to break me in half and carry the halves in different directions. The bite is fire. And in the instant before the scream, I see it. A scar I've known since middle school, crossing the right brow. Those eyes aren't a stranger's. They're his, I scream. The woods answer. This is whispering narratives, where survival isn't promised and the old pacts still collect their debts. If you make it out of this one, subscribe before the next full moon. I used to say you can tell when you've crossed the line from trail to wild. Trails end politely. The wild doesn't acknowledge you at all. We had taken the old fire road up to the ridge like we did when we were kids. Eli with the same battered thermos, me with the same habit of counting fence posts and pretending numbers could keep us safe. He'd been off for months. No texts, no sarcasm. Just a sudden return with a message that didn't read like him. Meet me where we buried the knee. Knife. That was a secret from a simpler crime. We'd cut our palms when we were 12 and swore we'd die brothers. It's the kind of ritual kids make because they need the world to mean something. Funny thing, the world heard. The moon came late, swollen low, the trees leaned in. Eli walked ahead with the sort of caution born from knowing what's behind you is worse than what's ahead. You okay? I asked, which is the thin bandage people offer when they see a wound bigger than empathy. He didn't answer. He kept sniffing the air like he was trying to find a word he'd forgotten. The ridge opened like a jawbone missing its lower half, white limestone biting into the night. And there, exactly where we'd made ourselves brothers, was the knife, the handle eaten by moss, the blade rusted to the color of dried heart. Eli stared at it as if it might blink. "Tell me why I'm here," I said. He crouched. His fingers hovered over the moss and didn't touch. "Because I tried to run," he said, voice sandpapery, "and the road circles back. I thought rehab relapse, a debt, some nameless trouble with a shadow attached. I thought human things. So I didn't notice when he took 2 steps back, not as a retreat, but as a mercy. The first growl didn't come from his throat. It came from the ground under us, as if the ridge itself complained at what it was about to witness. His shoulders rolled as if reset by a pair of angry hands. I remember his eyes more than the sound. How they brightened and then caught an ash-white ring, the pupil blown to bottomless. "Eli," I said, and the name disintegrated in my mouth. He looked at me with a grief I wouldn't understand until much later, and he said something that wasn't a word so much as an old shape of one, like language chewed by hunger. "Run." The change took him like a decision made centuries ago. Tendons roped his forearms, fingers stretched and didn't stop stretching until they found a different arithmetic, one that ends in points. His face fought itself, cheekbones slipping, jaw dislocating and rehinging into a wider mathematics. The sound of teeth arriving is wet and delicate, like knuckles cracking under a pillow. The sound of ribs making room isn't delicate at all. Ran the way a childhood version of me would have hated. A stumble, a half-turn, a look back when every instinct deserved a prize for not doing that. Moonlight made everything a kind of truth. Behind me, Eli, no longer entirely human, fell to all fours the way a cathedral lowers its bells. He was wrong in the ways that make folklore inevitable. Too long, too fast, too certain. The forest became a seam ripper working my night apart. Bracken slapped my legs. Rocks slid exactly where my foot needed certainty. I cut left through a stand of saplings because I remembered the barbed wire there, the old cattle fence we'd cursed as kids. It caught my jacket sleeve, bit into it, and the thing behind me hit it hard enough to make the posts scream. The wire sang and snapped, and something with too many muscles exhaled a sound like a vow. I made it to the ravine by falling into it on purpose, trusting the wet leaves to betray me less than teeth. The slope grabbed me, spun me, painted my forearms with mud and leaf stain and a blacker thread I only later placed as sap. I came up under the rotted trunk of an oak and tried to learn how to breathe with someone else's breath stapled to mine. Silence. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate. The kind of tread that says, "I can find you without my eyes." He stopped above the trunk. My heart tried to kick through my spine. I could smell him, copper and old fur and a sweetness like flowers left in a room too long. My hand found a stone. I remembered the knife we'd buried and hated us for burying it. Eli, or what the curse had decided to put in his place, sniffed. Then he made a noise I recognized too well. A strangled human syllable suffocated by a mouth that wasn't designed for pleading. He brought his head down, slow, until one golden eye met mine through the mossed bark. It held, it asked, it warned. "Don't," I breathed. The word didn't change the world, but something still him, did. He jerked away from the trunk like he'd been yanked by a chain and bolted upslope with a speed that rewrote what I believed about speed. A moment later, the night shuddered with a howl that sounded like a prayer that had misplaced God. I don't remember getting home. I remember water scalding a bite I pretended was a dog. I remember my kitchen light, too bright and too clean, showing me how teeth make patterns on skin like constellations. I remember his scar. I remember knowing that the story we'd been practicing as boys, blood brothers forever, had graduated to a lesson with teeth. The fever came before dawn. The dreams came with it, hot and lucid, and in every single one the moon was closer than it had any right to be, and everything I loved had the wrong number of bones. By the second dawn, the bite was no longer a wound, it was a door. There should be a shepherd's bell before your life changes, some civil little warning. Instead, it's coffee spilling down your wrist, and the way your apartment's shadows suddenly examine you back. On day 3, the city sounded noon, while the clocks argued it was 8. I could hear the can in my neighbor's hand kiss the rim of his trash bin 4 doors down. The elevator cables muttered to themselves in a tongue I could almost translate. The air conditioning duct asked the room if anyone else smelled rain. I did. It was 90 degrees and cloudless. The bite itched, not surface itch, marrow itch. An ache in the oldest wood of me. It traced the nerve map up the forearm into the bicep, claimed my shoulder like a deed. I soaked it in ice until my skin forgot it belonged to me. 10 minutes later, the heat boiled out from inside, a kiln devoted to remaking pottery someone else already drank from. I tried to call Eli. I left a message that sounded like a prayer, and a threat got married. I said, "I know it was you," and hated how much of me wanted it not to be. Then I said a thing you don't say, not out loud. "If this is my fault, let me pay. If it's yours, let me carry it." The kind of promise that finds witnesses you never invited. The first breaking didn't wait for dark. It came at 4:13 p.m. in a bathroom stall at the mechanic's while I was asking for a new alternator so my car would be able to outrun what I knew was catching up. There's a distinctive silence that lives inside public bathrooms between a flush and the next sin. I was in the center of that silence when my hands forgot the agreed number of joints. It was weirdly polite at first, like my body asked permission. The fingers stretched, peaked, retreated. The nails tested the air and came back a fraction longer, a fraction thicker, the crescent of each going from friendly moon to predator's smile. A pressure built in my jaw. The hinge smoothed, widened, then protested with a crack that spun sweat along my temple. My gums swelled the way tide does. When the moon can't help itself, I gripped the sink. Porcelain remembers storms. It held me while the tendons on the back of my hand tuned like violin strings for a song I didn't want. Hair tufted at my wrist, coarser, darker. The mirror offered me a stranger, and then, to be kind, fogged. In that fog I saw shapes that weren't there. Trees, stones like teeth, a circle of them, and in the center, a thing that didn't need the moon to be itself. Someone knocked on the stall door. "You good, man?" "Yes," I said. And the S turned into something serpentine and too satisfied. I bit down on it. I bit hard enough to taste metal. When I opened my mouth, a canine had come in early to check the seating plan. There was blood in the spit. And there wasn't, because the spit wasn't spit anymore. It was a longer story. I made it home by counting breaths. 1 at the door, 5 down the hall, 20 up the stairs because the elevator had begun to sound like a mouth. Barricaded the bedroom like a teenager punishing a parent. Chair against knob, dresser against chair. I texted Eli again, "Don't come," or "Come fast." I don't know which one is mercy. The text bubble hung forever, then went flat like a diagnosis. The sun finally remembered it was supposed to help. It bled out. The sky did its reliable trick of pretending blue is endless until it isn't. Somewhere a dog decided the night needed an opinion. Somewhere a train thought about wolves. I lay on the floor where I couldn't damage my bed with the new math of me. Time sheared. The minute hand did a little dance, and then the clock grew honest. When the moon breached the window's edge, barely a sliver, a white fingernail peeling back the night, the itch left the bite. The heat receded. A cold moved in with Elise and 3 friends named Hunger. The sound that came out of me was not a howl. It was a sob, remembering how to sharpen itself. Bones are not shy when they move. We are full of instruments we don't know we own until the orchestra stands up at once. My spine lengthened 1 vertebra at a time, spaces opening for a tail that wasn't there yet, and would be. My shoulder blades sailed outward, then raised as if expecting wings and getting something heavy with purpose instead. The pelvis, that old gate, widened to invite different strides. And the ribs, God help the ribs, made an aisle for a larger core to process air like prayer beads. I should have been screaming. I thought I was, but the sound inside the sound was a layered chorus, 1 voice I'd know in any crowd, mine, another. That sounded like a forest floor deciding where to give, and beneath them, a drum older than my name. When it ended, there were claws in the floorboards where my hands had been, and the chair against the door had a new opinion about geometry. My mouth had learned the alphabet of teeth. I stood, but standing felt like an argument. The room suggested lower, and the room was right. Everything smelled like the opposite of ignorance. Dust catalogued by decade. The neighbor's cat, 2 doors down carrying daylight in its fur. The trail of Eli in my apartment, not from tonight, not from months. From years. From the way our laughter used to bead on the doorknob and dry slow. I pressed my forehead to the cold window because the glass didn't lie. The city glittered as if it weren't full of people making honest monsters of themselves. And in the reflection, beside the shape I had become, another shape appeared behind my shoulder without opening the door or the air. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He placed a hand, human, scar across the brow, against the glass as if the window were a grave slab, and we were relatives touching it from both sides. Then he was gone. Not the cheap gone of tricks, the true gone of a thing that owes the night rent and pays on time. I didn't sleep. Sleep would have been a betrayal. At dawn I was human again, demonstrably, but that felt like cosplay. The bite was no longer warm. It was cold as coin, currency, debt. I drove to the only person I knew who could tell me if my fear had a name that wasn't madness. Her name was Aunt Mara, though we weren't related if you asked paperwork. If you asked the old women who know how to answer questions that only sound like questions, she'd raised me after my mother's hard season and taught me how to listen to the river. If you asked the river, it would tell you she drank from it, without asking first, which in that valley counted as kinship. A house sat where the map gave up and let a ridge have its way. Wind chimes out front, not the pretty kind. The kind made of keys collected from doors that no longer exist. She answered before I knocked because people like her are never at the door by accident. She looked at my face and found the moon there, without moving her eyes. "Who bit you?" she asked, just like that. No soup, no comfort. "A scalpel goes first," I told her. I said his name. I said the ridge. I said the knife. I said the scar. I did not say the way he held himself back so I could live long enough to destroy what he couldn't. I didn't have those words yet. She held my wrist, turned it palm up like she was reading the river in me. The bite had healed like a tattoo, inked by a mouth. "Old," she said. "This isn't stray sickness. This is a covenant." "I thought it was a curse," I said, "because curses feel like things that can be broken with enough will, and possibly a saint." She shook her head. "Curses are what the powerless throw. Covenants are signed by equals. Between who?" She let go of my wrist and pointed past me, past the room, past the years. "Blood and stone," she said. "The First Fang circle. Your friend isn't the beginning. He's an echo. If you want out, you don't break him." She hesitated then, as if she could hear my ribs considering collusion with my heart. "You break the one who tuned him, and that will save him." My voice made the mistake of hope. "It might kill everything attached to the line." She said it like weather, inevitable, impartial. "I can't kill him," I said. "Then you'll join him," she said, not unkindly. "Either way, boy, you're choosing a family." She went to a shelf and took down a book that had the particular weight of objects that have been prayed to in emergencies. The leather was scar-smooth. On its spine, something like a sigil. 3 slashes in a circle, looked bitten in, not stamped. She opened to a page where the ink had the shine of blood under oil. The drawing there was of a stone ring, 13 upright, 1 fallen, a center blackened like it had been the receiving plate for sacrifices modest and egregious. At the bottom in an old hand it said, "First Fang, the debt that chooses its collector." "You'll need to find this circle," she said. "It's not on any map made by men who sign their names. It moves." "Circles don't move," I said, "because sometimes the stupid thing is the only stable thing to say." She smiled without humor. "This one does. It moves with the blood." I touched the page and hated how much of me felt cold. The ink was dry, of course. And yet when my finger left the paper, there were 3 new dots on the margin like punctuation my body added without my consent. "We'll need a guide," she said. "Your friend. If he still loves you more than the thing he's becoming." "He does," I said, and the certainty felt like jumping from a high rock into black water. "You trust the splash, not the depth." Mara gave me a tin the size of a sore secret. Inside, dried leaves. A stench like wet dog and rain on old iron, a single silver nail. "Brew the leaves with your blood. The nail goes through your shoe, right foot. It's an old trick to remind the land you won't step where you shouldn't. Might not stop you. Might make the difference between being hunted and being herded." "And if I'm being herded?" she shrugged. "Then turn and bite the shepherd." I left with the book under my shirt because some books like the sound of bone. The sun was low. The road out of the valley had grown an extra bend where there hadn't been one, which felt like a warning and a dare. When I reached my apartment, the door was unlocked even though I hadn't been imprecise. Inside, on the table where I set my keys like a ritual, there was a thermos with a dent near the base and a note ripped from the back of a field guide. The handwriting was the same, one that used to correct my math homework with drawings of wolves instead of numbers. "Don't look for me. Find the stones. If you end the line, end it clean." There was a blood smear at the edge of the note. Not enough to be a wound, enough to be a signature. I boiled the leaves. The smell punched me in the soft. I pricked my finger with the silver nail and let 3 drops fall into the boil. The surface quivered and then settled like the water had agreed to be more than water. I drank. It tasted like pennies and lightning, and the first time you say yes to something you shouldn't. The city didn't sleep. Neither did I. When the thin hours finally admitted they were letting dawn in, I heard a noise outside my door. A scratch, light but purposeful. I opened to a hallway empty except for what an old story would call a token. A clump of fur caught in the radiator's lip, black with a smoky sheen, and a thread of something that wasn't fur at all. Something like the hair in a lion's mane, thicker, older. A direction dressed as an accident. I followed it. Sometimes you abandon dignity and you crawl. It led me to the back stairwell, down past paint that remembered better years, out into the alley where the dumpsters discuss what they've seen, and then into the thin woods that try to pretend the city isn't hungry. I expected boot prints or paw marks. Instead, there were circles, flattened weeds in rings the width of a dinner plate, spaced like a constellation I couldn't name. I stepped into one. The world inhaled. The sound came from ahead and everywhere at once, a low, continuous murmur, a little like bees and a lot like prayers said through teeth. I went toward it because the only thing worse than walking toward it was not. The rings multiplied until the ground was a script I couldn't read but could obey. When the trees opened, they did it with ceremony. The circle was there. Stones tall enough to make a man feel the right kind of small. 13 upright, one fallen and cracked like a tooth with a cavity. In the center, a blackened plate the size of a grave for a single decision. The air above it trembled as if heat rose from a fire long dead. Around the stones, shapes moved with the aimless menace of things that don't need aim because they own the night. Eli stepped out from between two uprights, human in shape, jaw clenched like a vice over a scream. "Don't," he said, voice ragged, and then choked on the second word like it had claws. "Please." I went to him because my legs kept the promises my heart wrote when we were 12, and because the night smelled like endings, and because the book under my shirt had warmed as if my sweat were ink. He flinched when I reached for him. "Not from fear of me, but for me. It's older than me," he said. "Older than anyone who ever wrote rules down. It chooses, and we dress it up as fate to avoid looking it in the mouth. Tell me how to end it," I said. He let out a breath that had done hard time. "You don't want the price." "Tell me anyway." His face went softer, younger. For a second he wasn't the man who'd run from me months ago. He was the boy who blamed himself because the dog died when we were 14, even though it was winter and ice is merciless. "You find the origin," he said. "The one they call First Fang, though that's not a name. It's a job description. You end him." The line unspools. "The debt," he touched his chest, "gets called. And you?" The word stuck like fur in a drain. "If I'm thread on that spool," he said, "I go where threads go." "No, that's why I told you not to look." I turned to the stones because sometimes you ask a cathedral for permission even if you don't believe. The circle didn't answer. The fallen stone did. A scurry, a rustle, a thing like a shadow peeled off the break and arranged itself into something that would pass for a man in a story told by a cruel child. Blood calls, and you pick up. The voice was neither echo nor wind. It was the simple fact of sound. He was tall the way mountains are tall, because they don't know how to be anything else. His hair was wrong for hair. It was a mane that didn't stop at the skull but kept going down the spine in cords. His eyes weren't golden. They were the absence of color where color should have been, like mourning made into irises. Around his neck hung teeth, but they were not trophies. They were keys. Eli bowed his head without bowing anything else. "Progenitor," the word made my mouth dry. The thing cocked its head. "You buried a knife," it said to me, amused. "You thought oaths are statistics." "I thought we were kids," I said. "You were," he allowed. "Children are better priests because they don't know they are priests." He stepped into the circle's center. The ground didn't dare argue with him. "You want to cut the rope," he said. "End the line. Return the debt to the ledger." He smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "There is a cost for every mercy." I thought of Aunt Mara's keys chiming, of the nail in my shoe, of the book against my ribs like a second sternum. "Tell me the cost." He raised a hand and the shapes around the stones stopped moving the way a crowd stops when a tyrant stands. "You kill me," he said in a tone that would have sounded grand if it weren't so bored. "And everything I authored goes with me. Your friend. The ones who made monsters of themselves for thrill. The ones who didn't have a choice and wore the shame like a cloak anyway. The songs they taught their children. The children." He tilted his head the other way. "Or you kneel, bite the circle, speak the right and join the blood. Then your love of him won't be a weakness. It'll be a leash you both hold." Eli inhaled like breath might be rationed. The night felt like a court where I was my own attorney and the judge wore a wolf's skull. I did the stupidest, truest thing. I stepped into the circle. My right foot, nail through the sole, found the ground like a familiar. I put my palm on the blackened plate. It was cold, cold like a place under a river rock. "I'll end it," I said. My voice surprised me by not breaking. The progenitor's smile faded, not in anger, in interest. "Then run," he said, delighted, "because I won't be polite." He said a word that wasn't a word, and the stones shivered. Somewhere, far away and right behind me, someone howled with all their childhood inside the sound. They don't tell you this in stories because it makes heroes look like meat. When a thing older than your language decides to hunt you, some clean part of your mind leaves the building so the messy part can work. The messy part is very good at running. The progenitor moved first, but not toward me. He moved like a king calling in debts. The shapes around the stones uncurled into bodies designed for the economy of violence. Some were the classic sketch, lupine. High-shouldered eyes, like coins in snow. Some were wrong in ways evolution could sue for. Back legs that bent twice, arms that ended in too many choices, mouths that had forgotten to stop where faces do. They smelled like winter in a graveyard, and a butcher's apron, and the last clean shirt a guilty man wears. Eli didn't change. He put himself between me and the first two that leapt, and the sound he made wasn't human or wolf, it was brother. They faltered, which is what doubt does to attack. He used that breath, that beautiful, borrowed second, to slam one into a stone with violence that sounded like masonry offended. The other he raked across the chest with a hand that remembered it could become a paw when it needed to. Blood hit the air, and the air remembered churches. "Go," he said. The word carried hooks and carried me. The circle broke to admit me and then tried to close like a mouth. I ran the way men run when they aren't men all the way anymore. My stride found an economy I would have envied in high school track. The ground didn't so much catch me as accept terms. The forest ahead wasn't the forest I knew. The trees were the same, maples, oaks, the scrappy pines that make do, but they leaned in with a motive. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the rings on the ground rearranging like strategies. The book under my shirt thumped against my ribs in a rhythm that wasn't mine. I tasted iron and old fire, and underneath both, the bitter of Aunt Mara's brew getting ideas. The first one hit me from the left without a sound. They are very quiet when they want to be. We went down together, rolled, came up wrong. It was on me fast. Weight like an argument I couldn't win by logic. Its breath smelled like the inside of a hunter's story. Up close, its face was wolf until it turned just so, and became almost my face. The curse makes mirrors if you let it. I didn't have a silver bullet or an inherited sword with a grandparent's name attached. I had a rock. I put it in its ear. Rock works on a lot of problems if you're willing to be ugly. It yelped in a register that makes insects stop. I kicked, scrambled, learned that claws undo denim in a single decisive thesis. Something opened on my thigh. The heat that came out of me felt enthusiastic. I planted my right foot, the nail biting deeper into the sole, and turned. The ground turned with me, not nice, not kind, but in conspiracy, and the creature overshot and found a stump in its way that hadn't been there a blink ago. "Thank you," I said to the land, because manners matter when you're not the only mouth in the conversation. Branches cracked ahead, not pursuit, parallel. The progenitor wasn't crude. He didn't need to chase. He needed to tighten left. Eli's shout came from a throat working overtime to pass for human. I cut left, tore through sumac that tried to paint me poisonous, slid down a bank into a creek bed where stones kept secrets under moss. The water smelled metallic. My tongue tasted names that weren't in my mouth a second ago. Old family names, the kind that don't die, attached to towns that did. In the creek bed, the world made a tactical mistake. It gave me a straight line. I ran it. Behind me they ran too, not breathing hard, not needing to. Ahead the creek bent right, then left, then vanished altogether under a tangle of roots and stone, a culvert, dark mouth, wrong mouth, the kind of place children dare each other to enter at noon and dream about at 3 in the morning. I went in because sometimes you choose the smaller mouth. Inside, the echoes multiplied my breath until I was a choir of panicked men. The ceiling scraped my back. The water slicked my shoes into lyres. The nail in the right one rang a tiny bell on the stones. They were behind me in a moment, claws loud, because they wanted me to know. In the dim, I saw gouges on the concrete from nights like this I hadn't lived yet. The tunnel breathed sewer breath. The dark grew a texture. Then 3, my shoulder hit a protruding bolt, and the pain was a white, flower blooming and closing at once. At the first bend, a grate. Rusted, bent slightly, the way a thing that has said no for years finally learns, maybe. I hit its shoulder first, and it laughed at me like old metal does. Behind, the echo of something that would prefer I didn't have time to try again. Bite, I told myself. Ridiculous. You're not teeth yet. I grabbed the grate bars, felt the rust come away like scab, and pulled. It didn't give. I pulled the way a man pulls when he isn't pulling for himself anymore. It didn't give. The shadows behind me had patience and hunger and worse, curiosity. Turn, I heard, and it was not a voice from behind. It was Aunt Mara's voice, remembered and conveniently placed, not the grate. I turned. The wall left of the grate wasn't wall in the way walls are honest. It had been poured around something that wanted out. The concrete had hairline, fractures like crow's feet around a smile it couldn't hold. I put my palm to it. The book under my shirt warmed like it liked where my hand was. There's a trick to breaking old things that think they know you. You agree. I yielded, not all the way. A whisper. I let the bite wake up in the hand, in the forearm, in the shoulder. Bones asked permission. I gave them 1 minute. Tendons tuned. The nails lengthened enough to warn and then to perform. I raked the wall. Concrete protested. Rebar confessed. I dug like a small god with a deadline. Behind me, the tunnel filled with the sound of arrivals. I did not allow my imagination to put numbers to it. The opening became a hole, became an invitation. I dove. The concrete tried to take a souvenir from my back. It could have my shirt. I came out in roots and dirt, and a thin margin of air under the world where the bargains are kept. Above? Boots, not claws. Boots. I froze because sometimes the worst thing is variety. A man's voice, low, clipped. He went under. Another. Let him. The circle says run. We watch. Orders are to bring him back, and yours are to pretend you didn't hear mine. The boots paused. Someone crouched. Dirt fell like old snow near my cheek. He's listening. The voice smiled without the face helping. Good. Listen, debt boy, you don't have to run. We can bring you in polite. He can smell you while you make up your mind. Something chemical hit the air. I didn't wait to decide if it was mercy. I crawled. The underworld narrowed until I became an idea contorting inside a throat. The dirt said, almost kindly, smaller. I was. Shoulders squeezed, spine debated. A root scratched a line down my jaw like a lover who hasn't chosen a side. I emerged in a thicket that must have been invented by barbed wire. It had opinions about where my skin should end. I revised them with blood. The clearing beyond was full of moon, whether or not the sky allowed it. In the center, a cabin leaned as if remembering a decade it had enjoyed. Some cabins lie about safety. This one advertised crisis, windows boarded from inside, door chained but scratched, a trapline of tin cans around the porch, a bell made from a brake rotor. Someone had built a perimeter against monsters and then taught the monsters how to ring for service. I made it to the porch because my legs had agreed to union rules. Work now, complain later. I knocked. Polite, Mara's voice said. Always polite with thresholds. The door didn't open. The chain rattled. Chain. A voice from inside, not man, not wolf, the compromise between, said, "Take off your shoes." I did. Hopped on one foot to free the nail without showing it. The door opened to a chain's length. An eye catalogued me. Decided I was a problem. The owner already owned and closed. The chain slid. The door opened to a version of welcome. Eli stood there, human enough for this conversation. Shirt torn in a considered way, hands red to the wrist and clean past that. He'd cut his hair short, which is what a man does when avoiding mirrors. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You asked me to," I said, and held up the note. He closed his eyes like blinking cost. "I left that for a version of you who would listen to orders." "Bad audience," I said. He moved aside. The cabin smelled like cedar, bleach, and a stew that had boiled too long into apology. On the table, maps. Old topo, older hand-drawn, stitched together with red thread, like a wound sutured by a hopeful drunk. Circles on the maps like the ones in the weeds. In the corner, a metal cage with the door open and the bars bent like someone had tried to keep an idea and failed. "You look awful," I said, because our old jokes still wore holes in the knees and felt right. "You smell like the book," he said. "Mara. She gave me keys. She always does." He stirred the stew, not because it needed stirring, but because hands like to pretend they can do useful things when the soul is busy resigning. "I met him," I said. "Eli didn't." "Ask who." It did a thing to his face I'd seen 3 times. The once when his father didn't come home. The once when he learned the dog died. The once when he realized he was faster than the other boys in a way that made them admire him at noon and fear him at night. "You shouldn't have," he said. "That means he's seen you. That means the land will help him watch." "Then we move faster," I said. "Where's the circle when it wants to be ended?" "It isn't a where." He tapped the maps. The thread made a web. "It's a when drawn on a where. It shows where the blood is thickest. That's where he eats. That's where he sleeps. That's where he dreams. You want to kill a dream? Wake it at the wrong time with the wrong name on your tongue. Teach me the name." He looked at me then, not as a problem, not as a debt, but as the piece of his childhood that hadn't gotten eaten. "You can't say it without changing," he said. "It's shaped like a bite. It takes something, even as a sound." "Take it," I said. "Take it out of me later if we live." He laughed ugly. "You think there's a later? Tradition says we pretend there is," I said. "We value the past, right? Let's act like tomorrow respects that." That got a ghost of a smile. "Okay," he said. "We'll do something stupid and noble. We'll go at him when the moon is lowest, when he's bored with his own power, when he's least expecting the newly turned to try something that requires more love than hunger." He taught me the word. He didn't say it aloud. He traced it, with his finger on the table, not letters but the geometry of a mouth. My tongue learned shapes it didn't like. My jaw clicked its complaint. "It'll hurt when you say it," he said. "I've been practicing," I said, flexing the hand that remembered the wall. A can clinked on the line outside. Then another, with intention. Eli didn't look at me before he moved. He'd already placed me in the circle of his defense. He took a silvered length of chain from the wall, wrapped it around his forearm like a snake that had agreed to be a friend for one night only, and nodded to the back door. "Out," he said. "Creek path. If I don't come in 2 minutes," I didn't let him finish. "I'm not leaving you." He showed me his teeth. human but not optimistic. "I'm telling you how to win," he said. "You don't win by being brave at the wrong time." The front door blew inward on a wind that didn't belong to weather. The progenitor didn't come in. He didn't need to. 2 of his borrowings did, and the air did that thin thing air does before violence. Eli moved like a tradition, practiced answer to a question the body asks when it would rather not die. The chain sang against a skull. A claw found a shoulder and made a case for more arms. I did the math and ran. The creek path, the underworld breath, the smell of stones, the directions the book hummed into my bones. Behind me, my brother howled, and in it I heard the first oath we ever made, remixed for a darker century. I ran toward the place where stones remember who built them and why, and where names, if spoken with the right blood on the tongue, can end a history without asking permission from the future. The creek unstitched and restitched itself around my ankles as if water had fingers. The book under my shirt thumped in a counter-rhythm to my heart, old drum matching new panic. The woods require offerings. I left a thread of skin on a hawthorn and a bead of blood on a stone that had waited decades for a name to slip. Low in the trees, crows watched like accountants. The circle didn't wait for me. It adjusted, stones fractionally nearer, the fallen tooth lapped by shadow, as if the dark were proud of what it owned. Wind came from nowhere, the kind made by mouths. I stepped into the first ring, right foot first, the silver nail in my shoe pinning me to a geometry older than maps. The air thickened. Somewhere behind me the cabin groaned, a chain sang a last note. Wood remembered being forest and gave up. Ledger first, Aunt Mara had said in a voice I'd packed for emergencies. They won't trade with those who don't know what they owe. I knelt because pride is loud and monsters hear loud things. I pressed my cut finger to the black plate in the center, the sacrificial pan, lusterless and patient, and let 3 drops pattern the iron the way the book had taught me. The drops didn't spread. They held tight like coins that refused to tip the scale. "Debtor declares," I said, voice low. The shapes around the stones hissed at the pronunciation. Line named, blood named, debt called. The crows went silent. The air considered me a person. That's as much respect as you can beg from a covenant. A figure unhooked itself from the upright to my right. Not the progenitor, one of his bookkeepers, human-shaped the way a scarecrow is. The face was the face of a man who'd gone into the woods to harvest truffles and came out a century later with mushrooms for eyes. He carried a staff braided with old ribbons and child hair. He smelled like arithmetic. "What do you bring?" it asked. Not who, not why, but value. "My name," I said, and said it. Names mean something at circles like this. The staff hummed, tasting syllables for counterfeits. My line, and I said my mother's, my grandmother's, my grandfather's, those still living in my mouth, those I could retrieve from the bones of memory. My oath. And I said the knife we'd buried when we were boys, palm to palm, promise to promise. Oath holds. The bookkeeper rasped, pleased the way money is pleased by interest. Currency accepted. Ledger opens. The plate before. Me blued with cold, then warmed as if a hand pressed from beneath. Images rose in the metal like breath on glass. A procession of teeth, a moon at every phase, a field of faces I didn't know and then did. All the bloodline. Wolf children blooming and rotting through time. Parents teaching cubs to hide. Sinners making a fashion of hunger. Saints wearing fur like sackcloth and ashes. Eli's face appeared and nearly ended me. As a boy with a buzz, cut and scabbed knees, throwing a baseball with his whole life in his shoulder. As a teenager bleeding ethics at a party. As a man holding the chain like prayer. The plate showed the bite he'd given me and the one he'd taken farther back. Darker, the mouth that had printed the covenant into him. Then it showed a third bite, older than scripture. A jaw like a crown. A circle of stones that weren't these stones. A night when language had different bosses. Origin, the bookkeeper said, tapping the plate. A notch opened in the edge of the iron like a mouth resisting a smile. Name withheld by the Pact. All names are withheld until earned. Earned how? I asked, and immediately wished I'd phrased it as knowledge instead of question. The woods don't like questions. Questions are debts in disguise. By paying, the bookkeeper said. By teeth and by choice. The stones woke. The fallen tooth sighed, and the progenitor stepped from behind it with the grace of a hunger that never hurries. He was taller than last time because I was closer to the truth. The mane along his spine shifted as if it contained tongues. You wrote yourself in, he said, amused. So many want relief without signature. I want the line to end, I said, clean. He smelled my certainty the way dogs smell weather. Clean endings are rare, but not impossible. He circled. Slow. The ledger will close if my account closes. The world will be lighter by one song. You'll be lighter by many companions. He gazed at the plate. Eli's face shifted to me, then to the two of us in middle school, our palms pressed, a ribbon of red knitting boys into brothers. The progenitor's mouth twitched, a smile of pity or appetite. You children make such strong priests, he said again, almost kindly. What if I pay another way? I asked. He leaned, interested. I like commerce. Let the line end, I said, unable to keep my voice from breaking on the next. But let one thread stay, his. The forest laughed, a dry rustle like dresses long out of fashion. The bookkeeper struck its staff once against the ground. Barter denied, it intoned. Ledger requires consistency. If roots severed, branches fall. The progenitor lifted a hand, and the bookkeeper fell silent as if uncreated. Another way exists, he said, eyes like new moons, black with promise. Take my place, close me, become the account, carry the debt forward, but write a new table of law. You could spare him, you could spare 100 hymns, you could spare none and call it justice, and the Pact would purr. It respects decisiveness. Aunt Mara's voice tried to elbow in. Things older than you always offer 2 doors. The third door's made of teeth you bring. I touched the nail through my shoe and felt the circle's power balancing like a plate on a fingertip. Third way, I said quietly, my mouth dry as winter. Close the line and catch one thread. He tilted his skull. Show me the teeth you proposed to bring. So I did. I took the boy oath out of my pocket where I'd kept it since we dug it up, the knife, cleaned of moss and half of shame. I opened my palm. The scar across it was pale, old. I opened it further with the knife, new and hot. Blood pooled in rituals the way water finds riverbeds already carved. I pressed my bleeding palm to the plate and spoke the geometry Eli had traced on the cabin table. The knot name, the mouth shape that hurts to hold. It carved the air like a key going into a lock it doesn't deserve to own. Pain riffled my jaw, my ribs, my hip bones. The bite sang a high note. The plate hissed. The iron drank. The progenitor inhaled, not with lungs, but with a shift in the dark. Oh, he said, delighted, a loophole priest. The bookkeeper's staff rattled as if it wanted to applaud. Third way requires a counterweight, the progenitor said. Pleased to be entertained. A life for a line's mercy. 1 thread saved equals 1 thread bound. Bind me, I said. He laughed, quiet. We were getting there either way. Bind me in his place, I said. Leave him human and leave the circle without a king. He raised a finger. Without a king, there is a riot. The woods adore riots, your cities less so. If I leave, something must hold the treaty between fur and brick. Then bind me to the treaty, I said, throat now full of dry winter bees. Not to the bloodline, to the border. Make me the door that only opens when it should. The crows muttered. The bookkeeper took a step back. Even some of the shapes dwelling in muscle and mischief leaned away. The progenitor considered, long enough for the moon to crawl an inch across the world. You propose becoming function instead of king, he said. A hinge instead of a mouth. I nodded. We need fewer mouths. He smiled with half his teeth. That is true in every century. He looked at the plate. Eli's face hovered there between youth and ruin, as if decisions could edit time. The progenitor touched. The iron with one claw and the surface quaked like skin in a cold lake. Accepted, he said. One thread spared, one hinge installed. He lifted his hand and made a small motion you could mistake for mercy. It wasn't. It was the signal every hound in the wood had been groomed to love. Run, he said again. Let me see if you deserved the bargain. The ledger closed, the stones widened their stance. The fallen tooth grinned. A hunt, reset, and I ran. Low moon is witching hour adjacent. It's when power is lazy from its own feast. Good for thieves, better for traitors. Best for those who have nothing left to bargain but bone. The ground pitched me into a trough of fern and regret. Behind, the pack moved like weather, first a breeze of pad and claw, then a local storm. The forest drew lines across my path. Deadfall, thorn, a sudden sink where the earth remembered a collapsed den. I jumped the first, bled for the second, rolled through the third. The nail rang my shoe again like a bell tolling for a very small church. Eli came on my left, no longer trying to pass for a thing that pays taxes. He was half change, the human face stretched taut over the beginnings of a muzzle, the eyes savage with love. Straight, he grunted, and I obeyed not because I trusted the direction, but because obedience was suddenly efficient. We hit an old logging road. Gravel popped underfoot like tiny verdicts. Ahead, a cut where rain had carved a ramp. The kind of place you can go faster than you should. The kind of place you learn whether your joints will hold. They held, barely. We shot into a copse and the copse politely widened the aisle because Aunt Mara's brew still hummed a minor in my blood. On the other side, a meadow full of knee-high seed heads whispering the names of mammals who'd passed this week. Deer, fox, a pair of teenagers who had no idea the universe is full of teeth. Down, Eli hissed, and we went. The first of the progenitor's favorites flew overhead, confident, as a hawk that's never been told no. It overshot, landed in grass with a hiss, and swiveled the double-bent legs that had lodged in my nightmares between childhood and now. It smelled us and smiled because it owned smell. It padded forward. Two more followed, one with a jaw too wide for etiquette. Not here, Eli breathed. There. I followed his point. At the meadow's far edge, a fence, old cattle wire, its posts like drunk metronomes. Beyond it, rocks, in no pattern I could draw, but in a rhythm my teeth agreed with. Not one circle, many. Fragments of circles. The land had broken and scattered, them to be merciful or cruel. We belly-crawled, no dignity, no debate. The first hunter sniffed above us, curious why the air called our names without faces. The grass combed my neck with patient knives. We reached the fence. Eli lifted the wire with hands that could peel bark from copper. I slid under, left a strip of shirt and a ribbon of skin. On the other side, the ground greeted me like an old friend who was honest about debt. Stones, knee-high, chest-high, taller, half circles and quarter circles, a geometry of ruins. Together they made what a mathematician would call an approximation of a ring, good enough for a hedge, good enough for a hinge. Once inside the mess, the sound of the pack changed. Pursuit, owned by delight, flattened into duty. That's the thing about rules. Even monsters respect the ones that are older than their teeth. Make it a door, Eli said, voice moving inside the mask of fur and skin. Make it your door. How? I whispered, and my jaw flared. Change, trying to leak. Speak the not name, he said, but change it. You can't change a name like that. You can, he said, eyes bright with a last hope. If it's yours, he took my hand, claw meeting palm. Electricity bit up my arm. I stood in the ruin circle, bled onto a central rock, and tried to recall the shapes he'd traced in stew steam and ash. The not name was a bite. Bites take, but doors, Doors share. Please, I told the stones, and then realized stones are terrible with please. I tried again. I made the mouth shapes with intent, shifted just a hair, from devour to bind, from claim to carry. The syllables chewed me on the way out. The air bit back. The rocks shook off moss like old men shaking rain from coats. A line of light connected the broken arc like fishing line between teeth. The circle hummed. Hinge. The first hunter hit the fence with the enthusiasm of a drunk apology. The second cleared it and landed on the wrong side of the law. It padded toward us and then slowed, confused, as if a smell had gone missing. The third dropped in behind and hissed a question at the air. The progenitor did not jump. He arrived. One moment Meadow, the next, him, shadow poured into form, mane alive with small motions like whispers. He stood outside the slightly less broken ring and put his hands behind his back, like a man viewing a painting he half admired. A hinge, he said, pleased. How quaint. Will you squeak only when fed nonsense, I said, because humor is mouth armor. Good, he said. The borders like wit. The pack fanned, forming a horseshoe around the ruin circle. Eli tightened his grip, claws careful against my skin the way a surgeon is careful because they're tired of funerals. It's time, he said. For what? I asked, but I knew. The bargain doesn't let you loiter. For you to shut a mouth bigger than yours, he said, eyes shining, and for me to stop being a thread. No. He smiled the way a brother smiles when he's already paid for your mistake and is happy to pay again. You bought me an exit, he said. Take it. Outside the ruins, the progenitor inhaled. The meadow bowed. He sighed, he said, almost bored, which means he was very interested. Or I'll do it for you, and my version of mercy is a knife with no handle. I stepped to the center stone, the altar that pretends it isn't, placed both hands on it, and felt the world's draft move through the chink I was about to become. The not name crowded my mouth. The new shape of it pressed behind my teeth, like a word that wants to be born. Before this judgment, I said, I set terms. Laughter rippled through the pack, amused fleas on a great back. The progenitor raised one finger and the laughter died unbitten. Speak, he said, because kings love the theater of consent. One, I said. The line closes at your fall, clean. No lingering debts, no stray curses slipping into new mouths like squatters. When I shut this hinge, the door stops letting monsters pass as metaphors. Accepted, he said too quickly. He'd always wanted a clean statue of himself. Two, I said, and my voice found a new hardness I didn't recognize. One thread is spared, the boy who brought me here, who refused to eat me even when the blood told him to make me a story. He wakes human, free. The progenitor's head cocked. The mane rustled with tiny voices like beetles voting. Accepted, he said, after a stillness that made my bones negotiate with gravity. With the counterweight we agreed. 3, I said. No more children drafted by accident. The hinge will require vows, not bites. Doors should be walked through, not fallen into. Silence. Even the grass stopped explaining itself to the wind. The bookkeeper's staff trembled like a compass near a magnet. The progenitor's lip curled, not in anger, in recognition. You do value the past, he said. The old way was oath once. Then came hunger and we called it tradition because we didn't want to apologize. He looked at the pack. Some looked back, offended. Others looked relieved. One or two looked afraid in the hopeful way. Accepted, he said. And now his voice was grave. Hinge, accept your pin. The word hit like weather. The ruin circle brightened, the little knot light of old rules waking. The nail in my shoe went hot and then cold, then vanished as if it had punched through into a different map. The center stone pushed up into my palms like a patient's heart into a surgeon's hands. Say it, I whispered. His human voice had come back to him for a moment, just long enough to hurt. I said the not name, changed. The syllables weren't human. They were hunger rerouted to duty. They drew blood from my tongue, took a year from my life and tried to steal a promise I'd made when I was 12. I wouldn't let them. I swallowed my own oath and spat half of it onto the stone. The iron of it streaked the surface like a signature that bites back. The progenitor stepped to the edge of the ring. He didn't try to enter. Rules only break when we're bored, and he wasn't bored. He inclined his head in a gesture too elegant for a monster and too honest for a king. "Come," he said. "Take what I am." He opened his arms the way a father pretends he forgives. I stepped forward once. The ruins thrummed like a throat about to sing. Eli tugged my wrist, gentle. "You don't have to," he said, and meant the lie. "I do," I said, and meant the truth he didn't want. I took another step. The world narrowed to a tunnel with teeth. At its far end, a maw waited. The progenitor's mouth, the circle's mouth, the future's mouth, all open, all ready to make my name a past tense. I didn't give them my name. I gave them my function. I reached out, not to the king's offered embrace, but to the negative space between us, the emptiness the covenant had kept like a savings account. My hands closed around nothing. Nothing closed around me. Cold slid up my arms like sleeves soaked in moonlight. My spine went rod straight and then hollow. My ribs flared, then locked. The hinge installed. For a flicker, I saw everything the line had done and been. Hunts righteous and vile, punishments deserved and not. Mothers hiding cubs in corn cribs, and fathers teaching sons which throats are appetites and which are crimes. I saw the origin night, the first circle, the first vow, the first foolish bargain with something that looked like God because it offered rules. I saw how rules rot. I took that rot into me the way a fire takes damp wood. Hiss first, then flame. "Now," the progenitor said, and stepped delicately into the half-ring's light. The hinge shut, not all the way. I gave it the smallest gap, a mercy slit through which a single thread could pass. The air collapsed like lungs at a funeral. The pack howled, not in triumph, not in grief, but in confusion. The cry of animals who have lost the sound they organize their hearts around. The progenitor's eyes widened, not with surprise, he didn't own that. With admiration he hadn't granted in centuries. "Clever child," he said, almost laughing. "You built a door with a keyhole, and I threw away the key," I said, though I hadn't. I had swallowed it. He moved to strike because kings can't end on compliments. The strike was beautiful, mathematics with muscle. It would have taken my head if the hinge had been a fraction slower. It wasn't. The circle bit him, not with teeth, with terms. It seized the main light, the rule heat, the first song, and he roared. And in his roar I heard 1,000 winters and 100 feasts, and the quiet sob of a child who wanted a rule so his life would make sense. The sound shredded leaves off 100 saplings. The crows fled. The bookkeeper slammed its staff into dirt until the staff splintered and became less than wood. "Ledger closes," the earth said, not needing a mouth. The progenitor fell without, falling, unwritten while standing. His outline drew tight, then went thin, then became a line itself, a line that twanged like a plucked string and snapped. The stone plate drank what didn't become dust. The dust settled on my arms like blessing, or blame. In the instant he ended, the pack fractured. Some collapsed into shapes that would be human by morning. Some fled into woods, into holes in the law, into myths that would take decades to cool. One or two tried to rush the ring, but the hinge held and the teeth of the border showed. Meadow exhaled. "Lie," I said, turning. "Thread." He was on his knees, eyes closed, face lift by lift, abandoning the mask of fur. The claws retracted, leaving nails dirty and bitten. The jaw gave up its additional hinge. The shoulders fell. Into old math. He raised his head, a man again, and looked at me like a person looks at the sun after weeks of rain. "You did it," he said. "Wonder and sorrow in equal shares." "You're free," I said. "And you?" he asked, already knowing. I smiled. It felt like a hinge trying on a mouth. Busy, I said. The border's poorly staffed. The woods took a long, shivering breath that tasted like a century ending. Distant sirens remembered their jobs. Somewhere a baby cried and then forgot why. The crows returned in ones and twos, nervous, opinionated. Eli stood, swayed, caught. My shoulder the way a man catches a railing when he remembers what gravity costs. The warmth of his hand bled through the ash and iron dust on my skin. "It's really over?" he asked. Child hope and grown fear braided. "The line is," I said. "But doors need watching, and the things that lived on the wrong side of it, some didn't take the memo." He laughed, a broken thing knitting. "You sound like Mara." "She'll say I'm quoting her wrong," I said. "That's tradition." We walked out of the ruin circle together. Me first, because hinges go through thresholds to test them. Him second, because free men get to choose their pace. The meadow smelled like wet iron and relief. The pack, what remained, kept their distance, eyes bright with a new math, hunger, carrying a smaller knife. At the cabin, the door hung from a torn hinge that resented the metaphor. The stew had burned. Into regret, a black ring around a pot that never asked for this job. The chain on the floor looked like a snake that had given up. Eli sat. Hands shook on instinct, then didn't, steadied by a nervous system that had been returned, dented, but functioning. He stared at the table where he'd traced the knot name, and touched the groove his claw had left. His finger, human, fit inside it like a memory nested in a new shape. "What happens to me?" he asked, quiet. "Tomorrow. Next year. You tell the truth to the right people and the right lies to the ones who'd weaponize the truth," I said. "You avoid circles unless the door invites you. You drink water first when you wake. You don't make oaths in jest. And you, I'll be around," I said. And the word around meant edges, and the edges meant everywhere. When a pact tries to grow teeth again, I'll lean on it. When a child is dared to do a ritual she doesn't understand, I'll trip the daring boy before he gets clever. When a town tells itself a story about a beast in the woods and starts bringing torches instead of questions, I'll blow the fire sideways. He looked at me, eyes bright in the low light, the way they'd been bright at 13 when we stole peaches and called it practice for brave nights. "Can you visit?" "Yes," I said. "Thresholds aren't prisons. They're promises." I tapped the doorframe. "If you hang wind chimes made of keys, I'll know where to knock." He laughed, and then cried, and then laughed again, which is a very old prayer. Dawn toyed with the horizon like a nervous host. The circle behind us dimmed to ruins again, the light lines going soft as thread in rain. The book under my shirt was gone, absorbed, consumed, or shelved in a library that had decided it could trust me with interlibrary loan. We walked to the road. A deer watched us and decided we weren't weather. On the gravel, my shoe rang once. Last. Bell. The nail was gone. My footprint had a new twitch to it, a small crescent at the heel where the hinge lived. We reached his truck. The dented thermos stood in the cup holder like a relic. He picked it up, thumbed the dent, and handed it to me the way men hand each other rings when they want to say more than "stay safe." "Keep it," he said. "You'll need coffee more than me," I said. And it was true in a small way and false in a larger. "I'll learn tea," he said, smiling like a threat to bad habits. You'll drink lightning and call it tradition." We stood in that old man's silence where goodbye is a knot you tighten slow because you know you'll have to untie it later. He hugged me, his arms, his ribs, his heat. He smelled like cedar and bleach and a thing that had decided to forgive the world for a while. "Brother," he said. "Always," I said, and that word didn't change the world, but the world adjusted its tie. He drove away. The dust settled. The woods watched me watch the day. The hinge in me vibrated, soft, insistent. A tug on a web I would have to maintain without sleep, if sleep cost a town its luck. Somewhere far east, something tried to grow a circle out of jealousy and wine. Somewhere west, a boy pricked his finger on a nail and decided to call it a vow. The border hummed like a new song, learning its chorus. I turned toward the trees. The path into them widened a handspan because the woods respect new employees on their first shift. The air tasted like iron and pine, and a job that would take the rest of my life, and consider that a fair price. On the wind, very faint, a voice like a friend leaning over a bar. If you're still breathing at dawn, packmate, come back for the next hunt. At Whispering Narratives, we don't just tell stories, we keep the doors honest. If you made it through this one, subscribe before the next full moon and share this with the one friend you'd save at any cost. Some debts are paid in courage, some are paid in clicks. Yours? Pay both. The woods opened. I went to work.